There is a massive difference between being a good HR leader and being an impactful CHRO. One manages processes, policies, and problems. The other shapes culture, drives business results, and fundamentally changes how an organization treats its people. Most HR professionals never make the leap. They get comfortable in their functional expertise, recruitment, compensation, learning and development, and mistake competence for readiness for the C-suite. They work harder, manage more chaos, but never quite break through the real strategic impact. So what's the difference? What separates the CHROs who actually move the needle from those who are just managing operational complexity? My guest today has spent his career studying exactly this question. Tom Emery is the founder of HEX and author of People, a book about reaching your potential as a chief people officer. He has worked at the highest level of HR leadership, and he has a clear-eyed perspective on what it actually takes to not just reach to the top, but to lead with real impact once you get there. Today, we are going to go deep on the skills, experiences, and daily practices that define an impactful CHRO. We are going to talk about the liability of coming up through functional HR expertise. We explore the career moves and experiences that separate future CHROs from those who plateau. We are going to dig in what a day in the life of a truly impactful CHRO actually looks like. And we talk about something that doesn't get discuss enough: how the top CHRO developed the fearlessness to challenge the status quo, push back on leadership, and make bold calls about culture and talent. If you are an ambitious HR leader who wants to become a CHRO with real impact, not just a title, this conversation is for you. Tom, welcome to the Growth Hacking Culture Podcast. It is lovely to have you here today.
Hi, Ivan. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Before we start, Tom, what led you to write your book? Because that's the motivation. I want to understand the motivation. Is it to give a lesson? Is it because all of the mistakes that you and me, we had to do in our careers, we say now it is time that it changes? What was your motivation?
All of those things. And some other things as well. So, my background was in human resources, and I spent over 20 years in a human resources career across lots of different industries. Most of it was spent though in financial services, and I got to do lots and lots of different jobs. I worked in a global bank where I got opportunities to do things all over the place and all over the world. And then I was a chief people officer in a wealth management firm in the city of London. And when I started in that chief people officer role, I'll be really honest, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing. I had an exceptionally brilliant CEO that I worked for, someone who is still a client and a friend now. But she was in her first CEO job, and we were really working this out together. We had a big agenda of change and transformation to implement in this organization. And I felt I was feeling my way in the dark a little bit. And when I decided to finish my corporate career and set up HEX and set up on my own, I thought there is a real opportunity here to help some of those chief people officers that were in the same position that I was, which is first time in a role that is not well defined, can mean lots of different things in different organizations and in different jurisdictions. And I wanted to be able to help those lonely people that didn't really have a clue where to start. And so that was really where the inspiration for the book came. I also, if I'm really honest, I run a business and I wanted something to give to people so that I had an asset, if you like. So when I was writing the book, I'll be honest, I didn't really want anyone to read it because I wasn't really confident in some of the content. But the publisher said to me, Tom, we don't publish books that people don't want to read. So if you're going to publish a book with us, you need to put some effort into it. So I did. And I actually am quite proud of it in the end. And I believe it is really helping people. So I've got a model that the book is based on, which I think is a really robust model actually around how to be great and do great things as an HR leader. So so that's where it came from. Yeah, and I'm on to book number two now, which is more difficult than book number one to write, but I'm getting there.
This is quite amazing. We are going to discuss about the model a little bit more. What struck me on your personal story is that you mentioned the fact that you were working together with the CEO. But
Mm,
Tom, I can tell you how many HR people has told me my CEO doesn't even want to see me because the CEO perception of the HR person is the guy that you see when it's a problem about people. But everything
mm,
has to do with people. But you don't want to have a discussion about well-being culture and so on when what you really a CEO wants is results, operational
yeah,
results. And
yeah.
that's like a major friction, disconnection, this lack of collaboration, and you call it loneliness. And it's true.
Mm,
It is about being lonely because how do you make that this CEO starts trusting you that you can drive money, the bottom line in the company?
yeah. Well, when I hear an HR leader say something like that to me, which I do hear it regularly, and they say, I've got a CEO doesn't want to see me or doesn't want to listen to me or has got me reporting into the chief operating officer or the chief finance officer, and I don't even have that seat at the table. The first thing I always ask them to do is to look at themselves and to look in the mirror and think about, well, what am I actually offering? And, what reason does this CEO have to come to me and to listen to me and to value the contribution that I make? And I think, lots of HR leaders, unfortunately, not all of them, and I don't want to generalize, but I do have a bit of a thing about the mindset of HR leaders. I think that there is a tendency sometimes for HR leaders to take a bit of a victim complex and
Mm.
say, I can't get into the right conversations. I can't get into the right rooms. Nobody's listening to me. People treat me as an administrator. They dump things on me when they don't know where else to put them. And so when I'm working with HR leaders, I'm saying to them, okay, well, let's look at how you respond in that situation, and let's look at how you're turning up, and let's look at how curious actually are you about how this business makes money and how you can use your position, your influence, not only the team you've got, but also the questions that you're asking, the challenge that you're giving to your exco peers and challenge that you're giving up to your CEO, so that they're starting to think in a different way and you're providing them with something useful. Because it's only at that point that you'll start to get invited into the right rooms, because they'll be saying, oh yeah, this Ivan guy, like, he's asking some good questions, and we need his input, we need his insight, and that's I think that's the way you do it. But it's not a quick process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's consistent behaviors that are really pushing on that door.
I love this word consistency because we are going to discuss a little bit more about these daily routines that these
Mm.
upcoming CHROs are doing. And I wanted to ask you, so when you have observed these people who are amazing on driving genuine impact on organizations, so driving business results, shaping cultures, what is the number one skill or habits that they have, routines, these consistent things that they do every single day that separates them from the rest of the people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two different questions there, or two different answers. So there's something about, where you spend your time and what are the small habits that you employ, that you build on over time, so that you become the person, as I said before, that people want to listen to and want to be part of. So I always sort of liken this to running a marathon. So I recently ran a marathon, first marathon that I've run, and I'm always quite interested in the science of training and things, and the science of, like, why am I training in a certain way to be able to run a marathon? And what you find is that it's not just about the amount of kilometers that you run, because some of them are valuable kilometers and some are less valuable kilometers. And so you work out, when do you need to do the more valuable kilometers? When do you need to really push into the discomfort? When do you need to sit back and do the easy stuff? And so I liken that to being successful, not just in an HR role, but just in any role and in life, actually, is thinking about, well, what are the rhythms and routines that you need to do, that you need to keep turning up for? And so I would say for an HR leader is, like, you've got to get the foundations right. So they're some of probably the easier things. If you've grown up in functional roles, like, you're probably able to turn the dial on paying people properly, making sure that people have a contract of employment, making sure that there's a performance management framework that works, making sure that there's a talent management process that works. And you've got to be able to do that, because if you're not doing that foundational stuff, nobody's going to listen to anything more interesting. But once you've got all that in place, I think it's really down to a couple of things. One of them is curiosity, and I talked a little bit about that already, which is how interested are you in what the business is doing, how it's making money or how it's saving money, and what's important to all those people that you work with. So if you're a chief operating officer, what's important to you? What do you need to be able to deliver your role effectively? And then therefore the HR leader can think about, okay, well, how do I turn up to enable that person to be successful? And the second thing is being a mirror. So often HR leaders talk about influence, like I have to get people to do something. I have to, get them to behave well, or I have to stop them from, behaving badly. And I always take a different view, which is it's about holding up a mirror and telling people what you observe and then asking them a question about it. So, for example, I'm noticing you've got a lot of attrition in your team, Ivan. What do you think's going on there? Not you need to do something differently, because then that just causes defensiveness. That's not partnership. That's the HR person just nagging and being a fly in the ointment. So it really is down to some quite simple stuff, I think, but it has to be done very intentionally, and some of it will feel quite uncomfortable because it won't necessarily fall back on skills that you've developed well throughout your career.
Tom, you call it simple stuff, but let me recap what I have heard from you. You have talked
Mm,
about efficiency, so knowing what are the things that you need to focus on. You have talked about the internal work. So first, it's not about this is the situation, this is an HR department, so it was meant to be administrative. No, it is about what you want to change. So getting to know yourself in a way that allows to move from the situation you are in and changing the perspective of where you want to be in the your HR career or the department. Then you have talked about curiosity. So this understanding how human resources impacts the other functions, the organization, and the curiosity also to understand what you can change today to become more efficient. And then you talk about also human connection, the ability to speak the same language than the others.
mm,
I can tell you these four things, you cannot learn them by reading a book. You cannot learn them by having a training of 2 days, even if you take a Harvard graduate. HR is about practice, meta skills, things that
yeah.
you is systems in your way you process information, right?
Absolutely. And, everything is incremental. So we build our skills. We build our skills slowly. And I'll go back to the marathon analogy in a minute. So when you're training to run faster, you do a lot of kilometers at a much slower rate. You build your aerobic capacity, and then you try and run fast, and you see what happens. Actually, that's when you see when you actually put a you really try and you really try to run faster. You see the results of all the slow training that you've been doing. And I think it's similar with progress in careers or progress as in terms of your skills and your effective as a leader. You put all the groundwork in, you do the small things, you build your consistent habits, you build your courage and your bravery to behave in a different way and to try new things. And then all of a sudden, you'll see a leap forward, and you'll realize that all that work that you were doing that you didn't really see any benefit from, all of a sudden you see the benefit. And I think as human beings, we always want to say, well, I'll do this and then this will happen. It doesn't work like that. If you need to influence someone, you might have to have a conversation 20 times. It's not just a one-time thing. If you want to be a better presenter, you don't just do it once and then work out how to do it. You do it 20 times and then all of a sudden you feel much more comfortable. Yeah, I think the habits, the consistency, the little things, really important.
I love this analogy with the marathon because there is two elements that always strikes me in the people who are doing marathon is this level of resilience because you give up when you don't have energy, you feel like dying. Even I don't do marathons, but when I run a little bit behind my dog, I feel like
Mm.
dying. And then there is this sense of flow. How do you find a mindset that will make you enjoy what you are doing and is still challenging and you want to thrive on that? And it entails that you have to be able to understand the situations, to understand what brings value, what doesn't bring value. So it's a lot of processes and the mindset that will allow you, in fact, if I understand you correctly, is more the mindset than the technical skills that will allow you to be an awesome CHRO. Is that
Mm.
correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think mindset's probably more important than your skills and your knowledge. You know, you have to believe that you can change and that you can influence things and people more effectively. And I think, you know, what I said before about HR leaders can sometimes fall into a victim mentality, and they can, you know, I'll use we actually because I used to do it. You know, we fall into the trap of thinking that the system is bad and the system is difficult. And do you know what? Sometimes the system is right, and you know, very, you know, in many ways easy for me to say with my level of privilege that I can change and fight that system. But I do think we've all got agency. We've all got something that we can do differently. And my experience says that when we change, systems change. So if I change the way that I interact with you, Ivan, then you will notice that I've changed it, or it might be subconscious, but you will notice something that I've changed, and then you will change in response. And therefore, the system starts to change. And I think sometimes we just don't give ourselves enough credit for the choices that we can make and enough confidence in the choices that we're able to make change.
It's still fine to have a little bit of lack of confidence. I don't, when you are doubting yourself a little bit about an action that you are taking, I think is one humble, and secondly, it allows you to have this mentality that, okay, maybe if I fail, it doesn't matter, and
Mm.
I can come back again. So this iterative way of conducting your life, where by failing you obtain a certain level of information, and then you do it again in another way. It gives you also the possibility to be critic about what you have done in the past and how can I do it better, more efficient, or with less part of failure. I still like this lack of confidence. I don't think that people with a lot of confidence can do amazing things.
I agree. I think that voice in your head that says, should you do this? I think that voice is worth listening to. I'm not sure that voice is always worth believing, though.
Yeah,
So,
indeed.
yeah. So I think I always say, you know, if something feels a little bit uncomfortable, then that's probably the right thing to go and try and do it, right? I think the easy way, the comfortable way, which our brain tells us is the best way, I'm not sure that really is true. So I think the brain's giving us a bit of bullshit, and I think we need to call it, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a LinkedIn post today just about, you know, I went into this job as, yeah, I set up my own business as a lifestyle choice. You know, I wanted to spend my time going and helping people and enabling leaders and all that sort of stuff. And actually, because the business grew, I'm now more like a CEO, and I have to do different things. I have to spend my time in a different way, and it scares me. You know, I feel uncomfortable. I don't know whether I can do this, but I also think that I want to do it, and I also think that scared, that you know, that edge, that's where I'm going to find even more fulfillment, even more happiness than I have now, because I'm going to push it and I'm going to be proud of it. And I think there's some similarities there with HR leaders about the conversations that they have, about the challenge they give, that mirror that they hold up in front of their peers and in front of their CEO. So yeah, I think if it feels a bit uncomfortable, that's probably the way forward for me.
That's a good lesson. In fact, I wish that every HR person had a moment that it feels a little bit scary every day, a little bit scary. It's not something where you're going to lose your job, but just pushing so that you are at that level because that means that you're doing amazing things.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of these HR people who comes from this functional expertise. So they come from recruitment, compensation, learning and development. Is it a liability, or is it okay if you want to make your way to be a CHRO? And according to you, what skills do you need to unlearn when on your way up?
I don't think that there is a good way or a bad way to become a CHRO. I think there are lots of different ways, and I think you might come up through a very specialist functional route like recruitment or talent or learning. You might come up through a generalist route like an HR business partner type role, which is what I did. I was never really a specialist. I was always a Or, it's increasingly common for people to take sideways moves from other roles within organizations into HR and go the career that way. I don't think it really matters. I think the habits that you have to unlearn when you're in a CHRO role or a CPO role are very similar to the habits you have to unlearn when you're in any senior leadership role. And that is that you go from having quite a lot of control over what you do and of what you achieve, and you're very comfortable in your knowledge because you've been doing that specialism for some time. And then you move from this position of control and understanding to, actually, I don't have control because I have to rely on other people to do lots of different things. And often they know their job better than I know what they're doing because they're specialists in their area. So that feels really, really uncomfortable for lots of senior leaders because they got to where they got to by being good at what they do. And then they've got to do something completely different in those leadership roles. So going back to what I said before about running a great HR function, part of my model that I developed, the CHRO Impact Framework model that I developed for the book, and that I use with HR leaders, is you have to be an expert in field. And by expert, I mean, you have to have a basic knowledge of everything that's going on within your team so that you can talk credibly about it. But what you don't need to know is you don't need to know every single detail. So, I grew up my career was, like I said, was in financial services. And when I became a chief people officer, and I'd always done generalist roles, I found that I had a pretty good grasp of how to be a good HR business partner, pretty good grasp of learning and development and talent management because I'd had involvement in that. But where I really struggled was reward. And reward and compensation in financial services in the UK, as in most places, highly regulated. Since the financial crash, lots and lots of attention on it. And also when you link that into being part of a public listed company where you've got quite transparent and important reporting regulations and rules around what you can do with your shareholders. That was an area where I had to learn a bit more. Like I had to get an understanding, a good understanding. But what I didn't do was I didn't learn how to crunch reward spreadsheets or you get into that level of detail. I didn't need to do that. I had a head of rewards do that. So what I had to be able to do was tell the story. I had to be able to respond to questions from my Remco chair about, was this meeting rigged? How is this going to motivate people? How are shareholders going to be responding to this? But I didn't need to have every last detail. And I think that's stepping away from detail is something that I talk about with exec teams all over the place. And it's hard because we have our identity on being able to do things, being good at things. You've got to step back and just be able to say, right, I'm okay. I'm going to take the risk of letting other people take control of that. And I'm going to respond with them in a different, I'm going to have a different sort of relationship with them in the detail.
That gets back to your point about curiosity. As an HR person, you need to have it. Now, is there any career move that you would recommend to someone in order to become a strong CHRO? Something, experiences or career moves that you would say, yeah, it would be good that that person spend some time, I don't know, in marketing. That would be weird, but still interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this and I don't think there is. I think it goes back to the career path of a good CHRO can take lots and lots of different routes. It could be a pure HR one. It could be, all sorts of secondments into different parts of the business and all that sort of stuff. And I've seen some brilliant HR people that have done stints, say, in really commercial roles, like particularly, like say in retail. They've gone and been an area manager for a retail store or something like that, and that is going to give you something really special, without a doubt. But you're probably also likely to be missing out on something else that the the person that came up with the traditional HR career and never did any of those things, you're probably missing out on something that they have. I think that the HR role, like any senior leadership role, is all around like, are you an enterprise leader? So are you just interested in this bit of your kingdom, if you like, your people agenda, or are you interested in what the business is trying to achieve more broadly, and therefore how you can really influence them and also decide where you put your time and energy to be able to impact the business really effectively? Have you got that mindset of somebody who is going to challenge and who is going to give your opinion and is going to ask questions so that people behave in a different way? And are you looking up? Are you looking out, to what's going on in the market? Are you interested in the innovation that's happening in organizations, in society, and thinking about how you use that, not only just things like that we talk about every day, like tech and AI and things, but also like how human beings relate to each other and how that can be brought into your organization. Because I think, the organizations that I observe, their biggest challenge is actually people don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to communicate effectively. They don't know how to have honest, direct conversations, and they don't know how to receive critical feedback in a way that doesn't make them defensive. And so, so I think all these things are really important in terms of how you bring the best self to the role.
There is a lot of athletes who talk about the role of failure, how many times they have failed in order to be that successful. So I'm thinking top of the mind, our national hero in Switzerland, Roger Federer. For instance, he made a beautiful speech to students about the role of failure in his career. So, and that relates to the question that I want to ask you. So, is there a failure that you had as an HR leader that has shaped your way of doing things more than the success that you have got in your full career?
I mean, I think was it Roger Federer who said that he'd lost, I think across his career, he lost more points than he won.
Yes,
And so, yeah,
indeed.
he had to be able to bounce back, didn't he? Every time. And I think, I mean, that's such a powerful thing, isn't it? For who is a person who's essentially like one of the greatest tennis players ever. I mean, look, there are lots of things that I've done badly over the years. I think my biggest realization came about 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer, when I started to question my responses to when things went wrong. I naturally, for me, relationships are very important. What people think of me is quite important. Like you can probably look at my genetics or look at my upbringing and you'll see why that is. But I believed that if I was criticized or if I did something wrong, the best thing that I could do was to apologize and make it better, which I think is a pretty good principle to have in life. However, like many sort of good things, I was overplaying it and I would become very over apologetic and I would actually start to create drama around the thing that I'd done, so that actually the thing that I got done was elevated, it was amplified, and it got worse and worse and worse. And actually it was when I started to question those emotional responses and question whether do I actually behave well or behave effectively when something goes wrong, that I started to really create change and create positive change. So I know now that when something goes wrong and when I'm triggered, when I'm emotionally triggered by something, then I've learned to be able to stop and do the opposite, which is not to jump straight to apology, not jump straight to fixing it, but just to stop and take some time to process, because that puts me in a better frame of mind to make a better and make a more appropriate response. Now, I'm 10, 12 years down the line from that, and I'm still not perfect at it. So I'm a human being. So things will upset me and I will behave badly. Like that's being a human being. But a lot of the work that I do with leaders now is really understanding what their triggers are. And sometimes often talking about when you're triggered. Often the best thing to do is the opposite of what your brain is telling you, bizarrely, although that might sound. And so if the brain is telling you to go and challenge back and be defensive, that's probably the moment to be quiet. If your brain is telling you to send the email, that's probably the moment to put it in your drafts and just wait for a little bit. If your brain is telling you to withdraw, that's probably the time to push forward and ask a question. I think these learnings are really important because they're so fundamental to you. And if you take your eye off them for any stretch of time, you forget and you'll just fall back into these very, very ingrained habits. Yeah, so I think that's probably my biggest learning, although it wasn't a specific example. It came from several examples, probably.
I can totally relate to your example. I think that your example is less about this story on popularity or being liked by other people. Is more about how do we manage our resources and our understanding of the triggers of the external triggers. So to be a people, in fact, you need to be very quite well trained, not like in a training, but into the mental process of recognizing your emotional patterns and having the time to get a choice. Because if we react by emotions, it goes out without all the information. So we have to wake up our rational part of the brain. It's not like our brain is telling us information that is two separate part of the brain. That one is a little bit more emotional, that is made to protect us, especially in the past, back in the wild times. But today we have the possibility to activate our rational part so that we can think and take the appropriate choice of response to. You made me think absolutely about mindfulness, about how do you start practicing recognizing your patterns. What can you do? And this is learnable. The cool thing is that this is learnable, but in order to be learned, you don't have to do an online training. In order to be learned, you need to practice every single day before you go to work so that you are able to catch these small little things. It is quite powerful, Tom, because this is something that happens to many people in their path to growth, that they still cannot manage their own. And it's a constant improvement. So we are always in a better version. So no matter that, for instance, me, I can still do it, make mistakes regarding my emotional connection or reading of the external world, but it's a constant practice. I will become better, but I will not be perfect.
Yeah, and it goes back to discomfort and this idea of how tolerant are we of discomfort. And we are designed to avoid discomfort if we can. I think we're much more designed to avoid discomfort than we are to seek pleasure. And a lot of actually things that people say are seeking pleasure are actually trying to remove discomfort. Whether it's
Natural. Yeah.
gambling or alcohol or scrolling on your phone, whatever it is, these are all things that just take a feeling away. And I think if we can learn and we can train our brain and train it like a muscle, if you like, a bit of neuroplasticity to be able to sit in discomfort and let it pass, let it wash over you. I mean, that's priceless, I think, in terms of impact, particularly as you get more senior, because people don't like erratic, emotional people in leadership positions. Or it's not that they don't like emotional people. They don't like people that find it difficult to manage their emotions, because we're all emotions, and emotions are a good thing, right? But we do need to be able to just sort of dampen them down, because that's what people around us need when we're in leadership roles.
It is difficult to tame our emotions, but it's easier to know how we are going to react to that emotions. We cannot kill it. We can just have a choice about how do we express it. It is talking about emotions. It is very difficult when you are in a senior executive position with all this mess, this chaos. I remember that back in my days in the corporate, everybody was asking a small question every 5 minutes. So you don't have really the time to either organize your strategic initiatives where you're going to put your efforts, your own time. Is there an advice that you can give us about how do you create that space for the work that matters? Because, or you have to wait until you are home, kids are in bed. So we are talking about 10 o'clock in the evening and you are half dead.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and this is, every organization I go into, everybody says we're too busy. We've got too much change. We have more change. We're busier than every other organization, and it's not true, right? We have a narrative actually around how busy we are, which sometimes I challenge with the people that I work with. And actually, when we get down to it, there are some different choices that people can make to make sure that they have more time. And actually, the people that stop and plan what they're going to prioritize, there's research that says that they actually end up with fewer things to do because they recognize more what is going to add value and what actually doesn't add value. And I mean, there are some simple things which might feel very uncomfortable. I mean, particularly I think for HR leaders. So, I always think that HR leaders are a bit like vets, look after animals, that a vet goes into veterinary work because they really love animals, yet they see animals at their worst, at their sickest, they have to euthanize an animal. They see them in these terrible states. And I think there's obviously HR leaders don't have to euthanize people, thankfully, but we see them in their most difficult times when they need help, or maybe they've just been fired, or they're going through a grievance process, or, they're really struggling with something. And we actually have to lean into the discomfort sometimes of not being able to sort everybody else's problems out all the time. And actually to be able to push back on taking other people's emotional labor, we might sit with people and we might sit with them with compassion, but we can't make them better. And I think, often like people are coming to us, every 5 minutes asking us a question. We want to be helpful. It's our identity that we want to give people the information they need to enable them. But actually, that might not be helping the greater good. And so actually, we might need to be more conscious about saying, actually, that's not mine. You're going to have to speak to somebody else about that. Or please don't disturb me between these times because I'm not taking questions. I'm working on something, that's value add. So I think we have to push to do things differently. And back to the point I made around you change, the system around you changes. So if you stop answering questions every 5 minutes, people will stop asking you questions every 5 minutes.
Hmm.
Possibly. Yeah.
But the consequence of what you're saying is that you need to have a team, a direct team that's really empowered to take decisions. Like, for instance, about somebody who is not feeling well, and sometimes he's going to go straight to the CHRO to complain about a sucky manager and who is making his life miserable. You have to be able to empower your team to take decisions on your behalf, knowing what is your stand in terms of culture, the red lines that you draw about what type of behaviors are impossible, because it's not about having like laws, internal laws that say this is okay, this is not okay. There is always a case where it can be debatable. So there needs to be people who can take decisions on behalf of this this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's how you create psychological safety for people to be able to make those decisions and, to do their jobs properly. So if you as a leader, and I've seen this happen several times, if you create an environment where you say to people they are empowered to make a decision, but then when they make the wrong decision, you criticize and you get cross about that, then that doesn't empower. That doesn't create an empowered environment where people will want to make those decisions. So what I've always talked about is, with my teams, when I've led teams in the past, it's like you make the decision. That's your decision to make. And then if you make the wrong one or you make a bad one, we'll talk through what your thought process was, and then we'll work out, okay, well, what could have been different? But there's no drama in making a wrong decision. We have to make mistakes. I mean, we've already talked about it. The mistakes are where you really learn. So I think that's a safety thing. And I think if you don't have that on your team, that's another thing. Look at yourself and look at the way you behave with them.
Talking about looking at yourself, there is a problem. I didn't think about this question until just now. There is a lot of people, while they're going into racing into power influences their way of viewing the world. So they feel entitled. They don't feel like they have to say sorry. Or this type of activities where we want to change the culture is for them, not for me. I have more important things to do. So how do we make it so that this people CHRO becomes really self-awareness about human nature? Is anyone? It's not something for HR. We look at our politicians. Also, some of them become asses when they become really into power. How do we manage so that we don't become what we hate today before we end up in that position?
I mean, I think that's quite a difficult question to answer because, I don't think any of us would. Well, not many people. There might be a few people in the world who have an ambition to become a power crazed despot. That's mean and like what I say goes all the time. Like, but most of us, I think, consider ourselves to be driven by strong values and an integrity and all that sort of thing. So I think really that's a role for the HR leader to play, right? That we should be creating exec teams that are able to call out and that share the values that are important and are able to call out when they see somebody who is rising through the ranks and perhaps is becoming a little bit power crazy and to be able to call that out. And I talked right at the beginning of our conversation about this idea of the HR leader holding up a mirror, and that is a skill. It's a skill to hold a mirror up without it making the other person feel like they've been judged or attacked. And the way that I always do that is observation question, as I've said, which is, Ivan, I feel like people around you might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. I'm just sensing it. Like, what do you think? And that's not like, Ivan, you're making everyone feel uncomfortable. You need to change, which, because you're going to respond to that with a bit like, oh, right, well, that's an attack on me and my values and my identity. But if I give a bit of business feedback and I say, look, this is what I see happening around you, what do you think's happening there? Then it causes you to question yourself in a different way or question what's going on. And that really is a skill. And that is a 20 times conversation I might have to have that with you, not just a number one. And you say, oh yeah, I've been behaving really badly, I'm going to change and everything's fine. Like, not going to happen.
No.
But 20 times down the line, you might be thinking, maybe there is something that I need to do here. And you do something different.
Would you have one piece of advice to give to this ambitious person who's trying to make it to the top as a CHRO, but he still wants to count on the possibility to be this people CHRO? What would be the one thing that he needs to practice already now? No matters that can, in fact, that he can start already now.
I don't want this to sound flippant, but one of the things I would say is stop taking it so seriously. Like, be yourself and know yourself. So recognize when you're triggered and question it. And, if you think that you're taking something really seriously and you feel attacked or you feel like you're not able to achieve the result that you want to achieve and it's frustrating and it's making you angry or just try and take it a little bit less seriously. And that will help you to process things in a different way. And it will help you to just take a step back and recognize what is going on so that you can make a different choice and a different behavior choice. The CHRO, to be a good one, always needs to be the adult in the room. And you can't be the adult in the room if you're triggered, because you're basically you're behaving like an 8-year-old in an adult's body, which is essentially what we all are. But if you can move out of that, stop taking it so seriously, become the adult in the room, you'll be so much more impactful, I promise.
I love that. In fact, it implies two levels of competencies. One is about being more compassionate, starting with yourself, and the other one is a certain level of self-awareness that you can practice today. Both of them are practice meta skills. This is good. Tom, is there a way that if people wants to ask you more questions? So I know that the first thing that they must do, people, in order to understand the framework that you're taking to be a people CHRO, is to go and buy your book. Easy to find, people twice. You can find it. I saw it in Amazon. You can find it in other places too. How can they reach you out otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, anybody who is listening or watching in the UK, you can get a free copy of it by going to my website. Unfortunately, because of ridiculous customs regulations and the cost, I can't send them overseas. Anybody in the UK can get a free copy if they go to my website, which is hex-development.com. So lots of free resources and lots of the events and the webinars and things that we do are on our website. So go and have a look at that. And then the other place is just LinkedIn. So I post lots of stuff on LinkedIn, lots of insights, always happy to hear from people. Anybody ever wants to chat, give me some feedback, tell me what you think. Always really happy to hear from people. And so that's the way to get me.
That's amazing. So I will put directly the link in order to download a copy of the book
Brilliant.
if you are in the UK, and then also the link to your LinkedIn profile. Tom, it was really lovely to spend time with someone who has such an extensive experience and such a drive for the purpose of making people CHRO. Really lovely to speak to you, Tom.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, Ivan. Thank you for having me.